What's up, hobby friends? Welcome to another miniature rescue. Today, we're going to do some serious eBay kit bashing on a brand new Kruleboyz kit. Ah yes, another day in October, another orc to rescue. And what a rescue we have today, so let's get straight to it. The model we will be working on today is a Marsh Crawler Sloggoth from the brand new Kruleboyz line for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. This is a fantastic kit that includes a super sweet Sloggoth, which is like a Troggoth, only slower, sloggier, I don't know. That has a platform on his back for his little goblin companions to snatch enemies up using long poles and nets. The swamp aesthetic is one of my favorite things, and I think there are a ton of fun things that we can do to bring out the unique look for these orcs.
Wait, a new model? What are you talking about? That's not a rescue?
Ah, yes, that is correct. But we will be using this model as the base for an extremely satisfying conversion using some eBay garbage that I found on eBay. So I was browsing eBay and I came across a Caradron Overlord's piece called a Grundstock gun hauler. It's a neat little airship that carries bombs and guns and a couple of little Overlord guys. A very cool model and one that normally goes for around 50 bucks USD, new in the box, and usually $30 for a good condition used model. This one, however, I picked up for 15 bucks, a super sweet deal for this little ship. Now the thing is, I actually have quite a bit of Overlord's models, probably enough to build a large army out of. The problem is, I've been putting them off for far too long that I'm kind of questioning whether or not I should even go down that road. That's kind of still up for debate, but in the meantime, I figured that I would put this airship to use and create something extremely unique for my Kruleboyz. The idea is that this gun hauler will replace the existing canopy on the Sloggoth's back. The story will be that a rogue gunship hauler from some battle has crash landed in the swamp, and these particular Kruleboyz came across that wreckage. Generally, we see Warhammer 40k orcs doing the salvaging and making incredible machines out of scrap and found objects. But today, these guys will be doing the salvaging and creating an incredibly intimidating ride for these guys to grab some enemies from. Creating a narrative for our conversion will help in a couple of different ways. Firstly, it informs us of the intent of the creatures that this model is portraying. What is the purpose that they need this scrap gun hauler for? And the other is setting. We know that these orcs live in swamps, so it's safe to assume that the ship went down in some kind of moisture-filled area that could have created some kind of weathering, depending on the length of time that was in that environment. All of these things are the questions that we get to answer with our hobby knife and paintbrush. So let's head to the table and see what kind of story we can tell with these models. The first thing we can do is begin to assemble the main model. That way we get to know the contours and we can make the best decisions as to what needs to stay and what needs to be snipped away. The first major cut I need to make will be removing the canopy from the top of the Sloggoth's back. They are connected by pretty small flat panels and they come off pretty easily. After the Sloggoth was assembled, I placed the gun hauler on top to see where it could possibly fit together. There were some parts in the way, so I cut them off and filed down the plastic to fit with the rest of the ship. From there, it was a matter of dry fitting it on top of the Sloggoth to get a feel for where it would sit best. Then I used super glue to attach the ship to the back of the model. It actually fit pretty nicely. The lines matched up pretty naturally, and there was a lot of contact between each model, making it feel like they were almost meant to be glued together to begin with. It's pretty nice when that happens for conversions. Next up, I cut away the excess pieces from the top of the ship that normally hold up its large floaty balloon thing. These parts come in handy almost immediately and help cover up some of the areas where we join the Sloggoth to the hull of the ship. I cut away some of the small bits to fit into the bottom of the ship and connect to the collar on the Sloggoth. That way, it looks like the ship is sitting on his back and at least for now has one point of contact where it's supposed to be tied to him. The more I look at this model, the more I'm thinking it needs, well, a little bit more. I know it's already kind of over the top and huge. It's way bigger than the model's supposed to be, but I'm starting to get this feeling like these Kruleboyz wouldn't just slap this old ship on top of this guy and call it a day. They would probably want to go even bigger and make it their own, using their own parts and pieces to integrate into the existing structure. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to use parts and pieces from the kit that we have left over to make this look a little bit more orky. Again, using that little bit of extra cutoff from the ship, I'm going to make a contact point for the orc canopy to sit on. So the original piece that goes on top of the Sloggoth will now be sitting in an even more grand sitting position to the side of the driver's seat on this gun hauler. That was a huge step in the right direction for me. I could really start to see where these guys were coming from, and I really liked it. But of course, there's a lot more to add before we're done. After the canopy was dry, I added some nets to the side of the hauler. These were the alternatives from the weapon options. So in a way, they could still be used if I wanted to, as they're sort of kind of technically displayed on the model. That might be pushing it. I also took the old anchor that was on the underside and finished off the collar for the Sloggoth. And finally, I took some jewelry chain and wrapped the whole thing together. This has been one of my favorite builds on this channel. It has such a unique look, and it does exactly what it needs to do for this model. It shows what it is, it carries a story, and it looks plausible as a Games Workshop model. Best of all, a conversion like this can be done with throwaway models off of eBay. I don't always shop for models that need a new paint job. A lot of the time I'm looking for models that can have a purpose beyond their intended use or original use. More often than not, there will be auctions for larger models like this. The auctions usually say terrain piece or something similar. Those types of auctions really present an opportunity to take someone else's trash and make something amazing out of it. Usually it's their old offcuts from some conversion that they did, and they don't really know what to do with the rest of the model, so we get to benefit. Before we get to painting this beast of a Kruleboy, let me tell you about the sponsor for today's video.
Battle Bosses is a 2 to 6 player game that has you playing as giant bosses, utilizing dice to gain energy and crystal resources to unleash devastating moves, spawn minions to send into battle, and play innovative cards to gain tactical advantage specific to your boss and minions. At the beginning of each game, both players combine and set up their tiles to create a single battlefield, put their boss in the starting space, and draw 5 cards from their deck. On their turn, each player rolls 4 dice, which will give them possible combinations of energy and crystals. Energy must be spent the turn it is earned to utilize boss abilities such as movement, creating minions, and unleashing their ultimate move. Crystals, on the other hand, can be saved up or used right away towards cards to give you the edge. At the end of each player's turn, they draw back up to 5 cards and begin their next round of carnage. Be the last boss standing while loyal minions become collateral damage. I got to sit down with this game and play a few rounds with my wife, and I gotta say it was actually pretty fun. This game reminds me a lot of Magic the Gathering, but with a really cool board game aesthetic built in. One of the things that I liked the most was that the rulebook was relatively small and it was pretty easy to just jump in and learn. So we were able to get a game in rather quickly and still have some fun without having to constantly look at the rulebook. It's pretty refreshing when you play a new game and there's a lot of parts and pieces and it's just intuitive enough that you have a good time. So if you like to outthink and outmaneuver your opponent in fast-paced strategy games, then I would definitely recommend Battle Bosses. Head to kess.co/battlebosses and pre-order your copy today. Thanks a lot, Kesco, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to painting.
Alright, let's get the paints out and start bringing the story to life. First things first, I'm going to prime this model black using Stynylrez Black Primer, and then follow that up with a coat of white ink shot mostly from above. The main reason for the white ink is so that we can see the model a little bit easier, for the camera and for myself when I start to pick out the parts to paint. The other reason is that if we keep our paints rather thin, we can pick up on that light to dark information and get some nice gradients for free. There are a few large elements on this model that can be taken care of with an airbrush. It's not necessary to use an airbrush, but it does speed up the process. The Sloggoth will get a nice coating of tan flesh from Pro Acryl, followed by some ochre on the joints and a small amount of black where there would be some rough skin, maybe contact with the ground. All of the wood gets a coating of ink tense wood from scale 75. The wood in particular comes out nice with this ink, and it almost doesn't need anything more once the rest of the base coats are filled in around it. It's a really awesome color if you can get your hands on it. Next up, I want to take care of the leather, which there's quite a bit of all over the place. I like to start with the base coat of Arbuckle's Brown from scale 75 and wet blend in some Scrag Brown from Citadel into that to highlight. Finally finishing it off with some tan skin tone for scratches and texture. Next up, it's time to fill out all the metallics. There are a variety of metals represented on both the Kruleboyz models and the Overlord ship, but for now I'll take a medium bright silver from Vallejo Metal Color and base coat all of the metallics with that. If we want more variety in the metal, then we can come back and paint the small bits and pieces to break up that silver. It's easier than trying to be super clean right off the bat and just miss little pieces here and there. Once that base coat is dry, I'm going to come back with some metal color copper and pick out the pieces that are in between the large areas of silver. That way it breaks up the color and gives the metal some nice variety. The front of these Caradron Overlord ships are very much focal pieces on these models. They're adorned with figureheads like those found on old military ships from the 16th to 20th century. Yeah, I googled that. So I wanted to make sure to do something a little bit nicer with this one, and proceeded to weather it like it had been crashed in a swamp for however many years. So I started with a nice ivory from Pro Acryl and painted over the front of the ship. Alright, that pretty much takes care of the base coats. Now it's time to give this thing a lot more depth with layering and weathering. Let's start with the Marsh Crawler himself and get a nice red wash all over the skin. This will unify our airbrush layers and bring those red tones that give the skin that life. It also brings in some nice contrast to the rest of the model and base. While I'm waiting for that wash to fully dry, I'm going to deploy a green and brown enamel wash. First up, the brown will cover pretty much everything on the ship. It brings definition to the recesses as well as making the whole thing look a lot more dirty. The green will go on the bottom half of the ship in mostly random places. Maybe these were under a little bit of water or just exposed to some kind of nature for an extended period of time. Really, it just gives us that swampy color vibe and makes this ship look like it's been around. This will all be wiped away with makeup sponges, leaving only the most concentrated stuff in the recesses. Once the enamels are dry, I'm going to start with some verdigris on the metallics. A good coating of this in the recesses will dull down that metal and make them look really aged. A little rust here and there, some dripping down the hull, and this thing is starting to look properly swampy. The last thing to do in order to finish off the painting will be to take care of the Sloggoth skin. I've been going back and forth with several different paint ranges to try and find a good light skin recipe, and I think I may have found something that I actually like. Using very thin layers of Pro Acryl tan flesh and then mixing in some Scale 75's pale flesh into that to bring up the highlights feels really natural and covers really smoothly. So I take my time going piece by piece and layer up the skin tone. Where we had a color variety in the base coat, I only go over just a little bit in order to preserve that initial color transition. Because this paint is thin, it really keeps those tones alive, and you get the sense that this guy has a pretty animalistic skin. The base needs to be properly swampy. So I covered it in brown mud texture paint and proceeded to add little swampy plants all over it. Once that dried, I used a little bit of realistic water to get some wetness into the pools of the mud. A little bit of mud and water on the feet of the model, and now the whole story comes together. This has been one of my favorite models to do in a very long time. New orcs are always something to take in and appreciate, and these new Kruleboyz are no exception. The swampy setting brings a new angle of storytelling and style of painting to the mix and really breathes new air into the orc range for Age of Sigmar. I do love the big and bulky orcs. There is an Iron Jaws problem that we will eventually have to address on this channel, but we'll save that for another time. For now, I'm going to go deep into the swamps and have some fun playing and painting up these fantastic orcs. Thank you again for joining me on another miniature rescue. If you like something about this video, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel. And a huge thank you to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon. I couldn't do this without you. And now, here is the finished Marsh Crawler Sloggoth.